I hereby open this academic ceremony in which Marie Labussière will defend the academic thesis Native Born but Not Yet Citizen, Citizenship and Educational Outcomes of the Children of Immigrants in the Netherlands. May I invite you to give us a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis?
Highly esteemed Prorector, dear members of the Corona, dear colleagues, friends, and dear family, it's an honor today to present my PhD dissertation entitled Native Born But Not Yet Citizen, Citizenship and Educational Outcomes of the Children of Immigrants in the Netherlands. In the next 15 minutes, I will outline the main contributions of this research as well as its most important findings. The present study stems out of a lack of research on the citizenship of the second generation, that is, children of immigrants who are born in the country to which their parents migrated. These children may have lived in their parents' country of immigration since birth, but they are not necessarily one of its citizens. And the reason is that in most countries in the world, children do not have rights to the citizenship of their country of birth. Countries that offer unconditional jus soli, that is, where children have unconditional rights to the citizenship of their country of birth, are mostly to be found in the Americas. In all other countries, children of immigrants inherit the citizenship of their parents at birth. And Europe is no exception to the rule. In Europe, one can only find a few countries that offer jus soli conditional on parents or children meeting certain requirements. This means that children of immigrants mainly rely on their parents' ability and desire to naturalize if they are to become citizens of their country of birth and residence. In other words, certain children of immigrants may grow up as foreign citizens in their country of birth, not by choice, but because their parents are not able to naturalize. And this may be a problem because host country citizenship provides a number of rights and benefits to immigrant families. For example, it provides protection against legal precariousness, voting rights and political rights, as well as unrestricted mobility and access to the labor market. And there is actually extensive evidence in the literature that naturalization fosters the economic, social, and cultural integration of immigrants. And there are reasons to think that the same may apply to their children. Children whose parents have naturalized may have higher levels of aspirations and resources to succeed at school because they are citizens. However, because of a lack of research in previous literature and because of a blind spot, this largely remains an open question. This is why in this dissertation, I investigate the extent to which citizenship status affect the educational outcomes of the native-born children of immigrants. And I do so in the Netherlands, a country whose citizenship and naturalization laws are fairly representative of the European landscape. In the Netherlands, children of immigrants acquire Dutch citizenship when they are minors only if their parents naturalize. And the naturalization requirement that if immigrants have to meet to acquire Dutch citizenship are also within the European norm. If we look closer at those requirements, we can see that acquiring Dutch citizenship via naturalization is not easy. It's a selective and costly process. Immigrants have to reside in the Netherlands at least 5 years prior to their application. They have to complete an integration and language test, and most of them have to renounce their former citizenship. Besides, they need to pay substantial administrative fees. And what is important to note is that naturalization requirements have been increasingly tightened over recent decades. This makes the Netherlands a particularly interesting case because this hardening trend may not only affect immigrants' access to host country citizenship, but also that of their children and indirectly affect their broader opportunities in the Netherlands. To investigate these questions, I use administrative register data from Statistics Netherlands, which cover the entire population legally residing in the country. I focus on the Dutch second generation strictly defined as children who are born in the Netherlands to two foreign-born parents. In my population, children are born between 1995 and 2010, and I observed them from birth until 2016. In total, my population roughly includes 300,000 individuals. And to analyze the relationship between citizenship and education, I use a combination of descriptive and causal inference methods. However, before conducting the empirical analysis, it is important to rely on solid theoretical foundations. And in the dissertation, I aim to offer a more comprehensive conceptualization of the effects of citizenship. And I do so based on the LifeCourse perspective. A LifeCourse perspective enables me to incorporate three important dimensions to the analysis of the effects of citizenship and education. First, because naturalization does not take place in a vacuum, its effects need to be contextualized within children's biographies. Second, as children of immigrants mainly rely on their parents in order to become Dutch citizens, it is important to take into account this intergenerational interdependence at the family level. And the last dimension is the institutional context. When analyzing the effects of citizenship, it is important to take into account immigration and citizenship laws, which condition access to host country citizenship for immigrants, as well as the educational context, which shapes the learning opportunities of students. Based on this theoretical framework, I conducted 3 empirical studies that each focuses on one sub-question. In the first empirical study, I analyzed the patterns of citizenship acquisition among the Dutch second generation, analyzing who acquires host country citizenship, when and under which family and institutional conditions. I then take an exploratory approach to analyze whether the citizenship status of children is associated with their educational trajectories in secondary education. In the last empirical study, I then move to a causal approach to investigate whether the effects of citizenship on education can be described as causal and whether they vary over time and between individuals. In the first empirical study, I look more precisely at 2 recent changes in naturalization law, which made it harder and more costly for immigrants to naturalize. When I look at the general patterns of citizenship acquisition among children, I observe that the vast majority of them acquire Dutch citizenship when they are minors, which confirms the idea that they mainly rely on their parents to acquire Dutch citizenship. And consistently, I find that those whose parents are eligible during the stricter naturalization requirements are less likely to become Dutch citizens or do so at a later date. This shows that naturalization reforms not only restrict access to host country citizenship for immigrants, but also that of their children. This is what I call an intergenerational impact of naturalization reforms. Altogether, these first findings outline the need to move away from an individual perspective on immigrant naturalization to take into account the family and institutional dynamics that shape host country citizenship acquisition among the children of immigrants. But the question is now whether reduced or delayed access to host country citizenship actually matters for educational outcomes and life opportunities. In the second empirical study, I analyze the relationship between citizenship and educational trajectories. I focus on trajectories because the Netherlands is a stratified and early tracking system in which students are placed around the age of 12 in a specific track for all subjects. And although it is possible to move between tracks further on, this requires substantial levels of information and knowledge. This is why in this study, I analyze the patterns of students' mobility between tracks to analyze whether those who became Dutch citizens are better equipped to navigate this complex system. In this study, I focus on the full sequences of students in secondary education, which offers a comprehensive perspective on their education. I find that those who acquire Dutch citizenship before entering secondary school are more likely to move upward in the course of their career, which means that they are more likely to change track if their current track is too low. And I also find that they are less likely to drop out, so more likely to remain in education. So these results are in line with the hypothesis that Dutch citizens are better able to navigate a complex system such as secondary education. Better able because more equipped and also with higher levels of aspirations. However, this observed positive association between citizenship and education may only reflect a correlation and not a causal effect of citizenship on education. And this is the case because naturalized and non-naturalized children are not comparable in all respects. As I said before, naturalization is a costly process that not all immigrants are willing or able to undertake. And the problem is that the parental resources and aspiration that enable the acquisition of host country citizenship may also positively affect their educational outcomes independently from the family's access to Dutch citizenship. What is problematic is that those resources and aspirations are not all observables in quantitative data. For example, parents' orientations towards the Netherlands is not observable. As a result, the observed relationship between citizenship and education may not reflect the causal effect of citizenship on education, but rather the joint influence of those unobserved parental resources. So this is something we need to take into account in the analysis. In the third empirical study, I used the fact that siblings roughly share the same family environment, including those unobservable parental characteristics. And I compare siblings within the same family who naturalized at a different age and analyze whether this has any effect on their performance at school at the end of primary school. And I find that those who acquire Dutch citizenship before the age of 14 have a substantial advantage in terms of test scores. However, I also show that this effect is not uniform. The earlier children of immigrants become Dutch citizens, the greater their advantage in terms of test score, especially if they naturalize before the age of 7. And I also find that the citizenship advantage is limited to disadvantaged students, those whose parents are at a disadvantage in the housing and labor market. This suggests that citizenship acts as a compensatory mechanism that mainly matters for children who otherwise lack important parental resources that are important for their educational achievement. So if I needed to summarize my research findings in one sentence, I would say that citizenship positively and significantly affects educational outcomes, but not at any age or for all. In particular, I show that the earlier children acquire Dutch citizenship, the greater their advantage in terms of educational outcomes. This has important policy implications because it means that policymakers should not only facilitate access to host country citizenship, but also make sure that this does not take place too late. Finally, I show that such facilitating early access to Dutch citizenship would be particularly beneficial to children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And this is very important because families that are disadvantaged are also the ones most affected by the tightening of naturalization requirements over the last decades. As a result, in a context where governments are increasingly restricting access to host country citizenship, it seems particularly crucial to mitigate barriers faced by those who need it the most. I thank you for your attention, and I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you for your presentation. The opposition will now be opened by Professor Valentina Mazzucato, Professor of Globalization and Development at Maastricht University. And Professor Mazzucato is also the chair of the Assessment Committee.
Dear candidate, let me first congratulate you on an extremely well-written and thoroughly researched thesis. You combine different literatures in a very clear way, and you use advanced and innovative techniques. I think the extreme care and meticulousness with which you do your analyses is nothing short but amazing. I mean, all you have to do is look at the appendices. They are basically a second thesis in which you try to look at all the different estimations, the checks, the counter checks. So, you know, we are 100% convinced that this is indeed the relationship that you're measuring. And I also want to say that I really appreciate the way that you combine qualitative insights to sort of justify and embed your quantitative study. An adage of mine is always, you can tell a great quantitative scholar by her engagement with qualitative studies. And you are such a scholar, Marie. This is also how I've experienced you as a member and convener of the Transnational Migration Group. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank you. Now my question, and because I'm the first, I'm going to ask a broad question, which maybe you might even know what I'm going to talk about. But all the while reading your thesis, I was thinking about the debates that are going on in the Netherlands and also at CBS on the categories that are used for research on migrants. So categories of non-Western versus Western are greatly under fire right now. Concepts of third-generation migrant has been greatly criticized, and by extension, one could also question the categories of first and second generation. So I was wondering, because you do kind of mention it at the end, there is one stelling proposition that also kind of touches upon this. But I'd like you to now use this opportunity to elaborate on sort of in what way has your research possibly can bring a critique to the kind of categories that are used in researching migrants, but also migrant youth. And in an ideal world, if CBS came to you and said, Marie, what questions should we be asking in our surveys? And even in register data, if we could add some things, what question would you want to add in order to refine the kind of categories that we could use in order to research these associations better?
Highly esteemed opponent, many thanks for your kind words and for your question. Yeah, so in the thesis, I try to avoid categories that foster a language of exclusion. So that's why I systematically rephrased expressions such as immigrant youth, who actually refer to individuals who are born in the countries to which their parents migrated. So so about the second generation more specifically, because I think this is a term that I use most often in the thesis, I do so because I think it adequately captures the specific experience of children in the host country. But I also agree that in a way it contributes to bring them back to the migration experience of their parents, which I also find problematic in some ways. So that's why in the introduction and in the conclusion, I preferred the longer expression native-born children of immigrants, which has the advantage to combine both characteristics and to remind that these children actually belong to this country as well. I think so you mentioned the categories used by CBS. So I don't use the distinction between non-Western and Western in the thesis. I prefer to construct my own categories for that purpose, because as you mentioned, these categories are highly problematic. And I think another category that I needed to deconstruct with CBS typologies is their own definition of second generation, which includes children of mixed background. And I think this is problematic because people are not always aware when reading statistics from Netherlands that actually it includes children who have one Dutch parent. And I think this is also problematic when researchers use these populations without looking at the heterogeneity within them, because the mechanisms are likely to be very different. So in terms of advice that I would like to give to CBS is also to call into question this notion of second generation, also to increase the conceptual clarity for research. And I think the term third generation also deserves further discussion, because one can wonder from how many generations those children will cease to be perceived as descendants of immigrants. So I think this is indeed a very necessary debate, both in the public arena, but also in research.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Thomas Seul. He is Professor of Sociology at McGill University, and I want to explicitly express the gratitude of our university that you traveled all the way from Canada to participate in this ceremony. Professor Seul.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to be here to participate in defense of this thesis. I've of course known Marie's work. I've followed it for a while, and I'm honored to be finally get a chance to meet you in person and ask a few questions about your work. I thought this is a very impressive thesis. It addresses an important and hard to answer question. I mean, people who have grappled with selection issues will know how to appreciate this, and you found, I think, a very convincing way to answer these. I think this is no small feat, and it really should be underlined. The thesis is extremely well located in the literature. It really makes a comprehensive. It contains a comprehensive review of previous research. It makes a very targeted and well-situated intervention there. You use the data that is there creatively, and you apply cutting-edge methods. I mean, it's the package. I would think this is really a very convincing and well-made thesis. And looking at your trajectory, I think it's really it's a hallmark of a promising researcher. Now, a question. I will also ask a very broad, rather conceptual question, because all the small ones are answered in this, and there's not much I could possibly latch on to here, and I don't want to get into real trivia. But I think there's some really, and hopefully maybe the question will help think through some broader conceptual issues. So you make a very convincing case that citizenship, or the lack of access to citizenship, really is a moment that structures inequality, and in this case, access to education within the Netherlands. Now, I'd like you to think, and as to the extent that's possible in like 5 minutes, or what we have here, to how could we think about this globally? Let's say we shift this out. Lack of access to Dutch citizenship doesn't just create inequality within the Netherlands, it's a part of what creates global inequality, right? There's a lot of people who might want to participate in, take advantage of the fantastic educational system in the Netherlands, but who can't because they're excluded because of their lack of access to Dutch citizenship. And one could say like this kind of external moment of citizenship, how it excludes people, is really one of the most important ways in which we maintain global inequality. Now, how could you start thinking how to link these two, the external moment, the exclusion from citizenship and access to the Netherlands, and the kind of exclusion that you sort of study so well? How are they different? How are they similar? How is one the legacy of the other potentially, and things of that nature?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind words and for your question. So just for my understanding, are you asking about inequalities in access to the Dutch territory, or are you talking about children who are born in the Netherlands but still are born in their parents' country of immigration and cannot access host country citizenship at a global level?
And both, right? So in a way, the fact that you have people who are in the Netherlands, socially Dutch, if you will, as you make the case so well, but don't have Dutch citizenship or not politically Dutch, is in a way a legacy of the fact that Holland controls access to citizenship mostly to keep people out, right? And so in a way, the inequality that you study is connected to this global moment of inequality. How would you think about this? How is it similar when the kind of lack of access to education that you study, how is that similar or different maybe from the lack of access to education, the education system in the Netherlands more broadly, let's say? If this question is excessively broad, I apologize. I'm happy to to concretize more further if you really want to. I totally get. You may choose to answer this question however you choose. I mean, there's many possible answers to this. Maybe should I rephrase a bit or?
Yeah,
okay.
maybe, yeah,
My apologies.
I'm sorry.
And I understand this, this maybe not make sense. So let's, maybe let me take a slightly different tack here. So what is the main mechanism you see by which Dutch citizenship leads to these inequalities, right? There's a wide variety of things. I think you discussed some of in your dissertation. Is it about, is it formal barriers? To what extent is it more informal barriers? And what's the range of ways in which you see a lack of access or the difficulties accessing Dutch citizenship translate into educational inequalities? Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification. It's not clearer. So so what I see in the Dutch case and more broadly, at least on the European level, it's a tendency of governments to restrict citizenship to those who belong, but with a definition of belonging that actually excludes people who are not from there, so to say. And here I'm thinking of the recent work from Jan Duivendak on nativism, which I think is very relevant to understand why those children, although they are born in the host country, although they have lived their entire life and they are socialized for citizenship, as you rightly term it is in your book, although these children are socialized for citizenship, they are not perceived as citizens. And actually, maybe we could also go beyond what I described in the CISI, that maybe even if those children would get host country citizenship, they will still be perceived as foreigners in some ways. So, and I imagine that foundations for this nativist conceptions are spread more broadly also in the world. And I can think also of President Trump's announcement that he would also remove the unconditional use only in the United States. I think it all belongs to this idea that actually only like the definition of the nation is more essentialist and only includes people that have lived there for actually I don't know how many years, but yeah, so I would link it to these discourses. Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Frank van Tubergen, a professor of theoretical empirical sociology at Utrecht University. And we also thank you, though you traveled less far than Canada, to be present at this occasion. And you are a member of the assessment committee, like Professor Sil.
Dear candidates, I would like to compliment you with your excellent work. I was deeply impressed by the various advanced methods that you apply in your empirical chapters. In particular, the sequence analysis of transitions, chapter 4, and the family fixed effects approach in chapter 5 are two strong methodological contributions to the literature. But I would also like to emphasize that your thesis is very well written, strong in theory, and innovative in various other ways. So congratulations. Now I'm here in my role to ask questions, but you made the task rather difficult for me. It took me really some time, but in the end I managed. So I would like to ask you to reflect on group differences. In your thesis, you treat immigrants as one group, and you pay relatively little attention to differences across immigrant groups, such as between those from Turkey, Morocco, China, or Poland, or differences between refugee groups and other migrant groups. Now, in migration research, scholars typically find that whatever outcome you study, let's say education or settlement intentions or language proficiency and so on, that there are strong differences across origin groups. And not only that, but there's also evidence for effect heterogeneity, something you address in chapter 5, but then do not relate that to origin group differences. So my question is, can you reflect on possible group differences with respect to citizenship acquisition, and also to group differences in a relationship between citizenship acquisition and educational outcomes?
Highly esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind word and for your question about group differences. I agree that in the dissertation I didn't pay a lot of attention to group differences, and I think I can say this was voluntarily, in the sense that I wanted to shift a little bit the focus from group differences to the immigrant characteristics that matter, in the sense that I feel in the literature the parents' country of origin is often used as a very broad proxy for the general context of reception, for their conditions of arrivals, for parental characteristics, even sometimes for their orientations or for their values and their compatibility with the host society, so which I find a bit problematic. So my idea was to unpack a parent's country of origin and to shift the focus toward the actual parental characteristics and to explain why I expect certain parental characteristics to matter, instead of relying on the country of origin as a very broad proxy for such characteristics. So that was a choice that I made. Although in the 5th chapter, this is taken into account in the analysis by design. So I'm actually comparing siblings whose parents comes from the same country of origin. So in that sense, that was a way also to control for an observed heterogeneity at the country of origin level. But it's true that otherwise, also in the theory, I devoted more attention to understanding what are the characteristics of parents that are likely to be involved for citizenship acquisition, but also for the relationship between citizenship and education. And I think characteristics such as, so their conditions of arrivals, so the migration motive that you mentioned, whether they are refugees, asylum seekers or not, but also the type of residence permit that they get when they arrive, which is an information that is, I would say, almost impossible to find, at least in most surveys and data that I know. I think these are very crucial information that may modulate the effect of citizenship on education. That would be necessary to take into account in future work. But I would argue that this is more important to take into account those characteristics than to just rely on parents' country of origin, because this approach neglects the great variation of individuals within countries of origin. So I think in the same way as I wanted to unpack the second generation, I didn't want to use their parents' country of origin as a as an umbrella term for the characteristics of immigrant families.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I don't know if I have more to.
Yeah, you could continue a little bit.
Yeah, so thank you. So at the very end of your thesis, you mentioned you'd like to include migration motive to differentiate between refugees and non-refugees, but that unfortunately you can't because the data are not so well. A lot of measurement error there, but you then say that the refugee groups are very well concentrated in certain origin countries, right?
Yeah.
And then they say, so I control for that by looking at including dummy variables for origin countries. So my question is, if it is so concentrated in these origin countries, why don't you then take the opportunity actually to look at origin differences and then make a comparison between refugees and non-refugee groups?
Yeah. Thanks for your additional question. I think that's what I do in the first empirical chapter when I analyze naturalization propensity, because here I distinguish between parents' origin group, because as you just said, I use it as a proxy for their migration motive, and I think here it's important to take that into account because refugees do not have the same cost-benefit calculation than other immigrants. So this is something I took into account in the analysis. But indeed, I didn't do so for the second empirical analysis.
Okay, so still some work to do, which is always good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Dr. Michaela Van Noore, lecturer of migration and development at UNU Merit, Maastricht University, and member of the assessment committee. Please.
Dear candidate, dear Marie, thank you very much for a fascinating dissertation. I think I would like to start by echoing many of the compliments that you've already received. Something I really appreciated about your thesis, and I think very much so ties into the question I would like to ask, is that you start in some way with a very large population to observe from. 300,000 is nothing to sneeze at. It's a very large observation number. But something I really appreciate about your dissertation, and I think is very clear already from the cover, is how humanely you actually treat this population. And I think this humanity is something that is often missing from many of the studies that focus on the life dynamics of the individuals who are under study. So I would like to thank you very much for taking this nuanced approach to observing how the real lived lives of individuals intersect with the structures in which they function. But of course, I have to ask you a question, not only give compliments. And I would like to talk a little bit about your conceptualization. I really appreciate that you use the LifeCourse approach or the LifeCourse framework, because I think it is a really nice way to, as you say, locate the choices that individuals make, the norms that they are facing, the roles that they take, within the broader decisions that they have to make about where their lives take them. And I very much so like that within the LifeCourse approach, you make some distinctions and you explain the concept of linked lives, for example, where you see the interdependencies of norms, roles, and decisions between individuals who are part of the same, let's say, social units like families. And you also emphasize how individuals navigate structures given these different levels of structures that influence them. Yet I found it a little bit challenging when reading your thesis to reconcile myself, this conceptual approach, with the actual empirical chapters. Because on the one hand, the LifeCourse approach really emphasizes the way individuals navigate structures and exert their own agency. The outcome that you're observing is on the child level. But when discussing agency, you locate it within families. And immigrant families as such do not have agency. They are comprised of individuals who make decisions and who express agency. And it got me thinking a little bit about how you would actually, let's say, approach the study of LifeCourse trajectories empirically, simply because you have to pull in a lot of different data to make it a matching approach. So I think I have a bit of a two-part question for you. I think the first is on why you've chosen the LifeCourse approach as your conceptual frame, and relatedly, how you would reconcile the conceptual assumptions that it makes with the empirical limitations or the methodological ones. And then the second part is more creative. If you had your druthers, if you could design any study that would allow you to actually study the conceptual underpinnings of the LifeCourse approach with appropriate methods, tools, and data, how would you do it?
Esteemed opponent, thanks for your kind words and for your question. So if I start with the question on the LifeCourse approach more specifically, I think there are several reasons why I chose this perspective. First, because in previous literature on the citizenship and educational outcomes of the children of immigrants specifically, there was a rather decontextualized modeling of naturalization and of its effects on education. In particular, the obstacles that immigrant families may face in effectively assisting their children's educational careers were completely neglected. So in that sense, for me, the LifeCourse perspective was an ideal framework for capturing the role of the institutions, of the norms that immigrant families are embedded in, together with their agency, without assuming that these families are entirely subjected to this constraint, but rather to see how they structure their decisions and their behavior. And so for me, that was an important reason for choosing the LifeCourse approach. And another reason was that in previous literature, the effect of citizenship is generally assumed to be uniform. And the LifeCourse perspective is also a very interesting way to show how it varies over the LifeCourse and to conceptualize what are potential timing effects of citizenship on the educational trajectories. And it also brings attention to effect heterogeneity by embedding children in their family and to see how the acquisition of host country citizenship interacts with other parental characteristics. So for me, that was the LifeCourse perspective could help me address two limitations that I identified in the previous literature. And I agree that the theory chapter goes beyond the empirical chapters in the sense that I was not able to incorporate nor to test all the hypotheses that I developed in the theory chapter in the empirical studies. However, when you say that the outcome is measured at the child level, when talking about children's access to host country citizenship, I think it is actually a family outcome in the sense that children rely on their parents to become Dutch citizens. And in the sample, when children acquire Dutch citizenship, it means that parents have acquired it as well. And this is, so in a sense, it's difficult to isolate children's acquisition of citizenship from that of their parents. So in that sense, citizenship acquisition of children is for me a family outcome. Although it would be a different story if I was focusing, for example, on older children of immigrants who may have more opportunities to naturalize by themselves. Of course, this is not, I do not observe the full trajectories until adulthood in this sample. But I agree that focusing on longer life trajectories would require then a different conceptualization that makes also more room for children's own understanding of citizenship, their own aspirations, and their own perception. As regards your second question about how I would better identify those mechanisms if I were to conduct my own analysis, would it?
Sorry, if I may interject, with outcomes that you observed, it's not citizenship acquisition, it's the educational outcome. So my question is, I guess, in a sense, more how would the acquisition of citizenship change a child's aspirations for education? So I understand completely that your independent variable is in a sense fixed. It's not within the child's determination. But the educational outcome can be a combination of resources and aspirations on the child level. So my question is more on that child level aspiration. How would you model it? And how does the outcome of educational achievement, let's say, reflect child's agency?
Yeah. So I think I understand better your question then. So in the thesis, I chose to focus more on parental resources than students' aspirations. And I think the main reason, there are maybe two reasons. So the first one is that I focus on students who are relatively young. So it's not obvious in the literature that students have very strong aspirations on their own at that age. So when they are around the age of 12, actually the qualitative study that I know on the subject show that children's aspirations are mainly a reflection on of their parents' aspirations. So in that sense, I didn't have the feeling that I was simplifying too much by shifting the focus on parents, because my population is still quite young. And the second reason is that in the literature, in the qualitative literature on citizenship for the children of immigrants, it is not obvious that all children are equally aware of the meaning of citizenship. Actually, there are some studies showing that some children of immigrants are not even aware they are foreign citizens in their country of birth, especially when they are quite young. And this is also what showed the work of Gonzalez in the United States. For example, he's talking about undocumented status, and he showed that some youth actually wait the age of majority to realize that they have an undocumented status, because this was not very salient before. So in that sense, I also didn't want to make assumptions that are not supported by any study on children's citizenship. Although I also agree that we need much more work on those youth and the meaning of citizenship for young adults. I think there is a huge gap, and this would enable us to better understand what is the role of aspirations and motivation, and also feeling of belonging, and how it modulates the relationship between citizenship and education.
Thank you. The opposition will be continued by Professor Inge de Wolf, Professor of Education Systems at the Maastricht University and member of the Assessment Committee, and she is joining us through a digital platform. Professor de Wolf.
Thank you. Dear candidate, dear Marie, I'm really sorry that I have to contribute to this discussion via this Zoom connection. I was planning to be there in person, and I'm really sorry that I couldn't make it in person. But I'm still honored to be part of the assessment committee, and also I'm very pleased that I can participate in this discussion via this internet connection. And as my colleagues did, I also want to start to congratulate you with a very good thesis. I was impressed especially by two things. So first is the creativity combined with the state-of-the-art advanced methods in the 3 empirical chapters. I was really impressed by that. And the second one is the combination of the theoretical and empirical work you did, and very well written. And so not only empirically very strong, but also theoretically very strong. My question, or maybe a set of questions, is about one of the interesting empirical chapters, chapter 4. And I was a little surprised, to be honest. In chapter 4, you look at the second generation and the impact of naturalization on the educational outcomes in a very complex, as you said, early tracked Dutch system. And I was a little surprised because the vast majority of these immigrants or these students with a migration background go to the VMBO track and afterwards the MBO. So I was wondering, you use this, no, I was a little surprised that you might have an oversimplification of the Dutch system because you use the VMBO track as just one track. A kind of black box, and then you can go to the HAVO or to the VWO, the pre-academic track. And because of this high percentage of these students of interest in this VMBO, I was wondering, have you ever considered, because within the VMBO track, there are 3 levels, VMBO Basis, VMBO Kader, and VMBO GT. Have you ever considered to use this within the VMBO, these 3 tracks as specific tracks, because it might increase your power, I think, in this empirical chapter. And I have 3 questions. So have you ever considered, and do you think, because of this power argument, it's a good idea to look within this VMBO black box and include that into your analysis too? The second question, is it possible with your methods, or is it then too complicated because you have the number of possible tracks in possible combination increases rapidly? So I was wondering, can you elaborate on that? And the third one is, do you think the results would be the same if you had included this within VMBO tracking in your analysis? Because what you see is that you see the more likely upward mobility and also the lower dropout rate. Do you think it would increase or decrease these results when you would have included the 3 VMBO tracks in your analysis? These were my questions.
Highly esteemed opponent, many thanks for your kind words and for your question about the 4th chapter and about the VMBO track. So actually, I think I started the analysis by looking at the VMBO and distinguishing all the different subtracks within VMBO. And I also distinguished between within track mobility and between track mobility, so that to see whether there are differences between students who move from VMBO to HAVO, for example, and students who move from the theoretical track to the Kader-opleiding, for example. So this is something that I did in the early stages of the analysis. And the main reason why, in the end, I focused only on between track mobility, that I thought it was it increased substantially the complexity of the analysis and also the interpretation, especially for an audience that is not extremely familiar with the Dutch context. From what I remember, the effects of citizenship were less significant for within track mobility. They were more substantial for between track mobility. And this is why I also decided to keep the broader picture instead of only focusing on students who start secondary education in the vocational track. And I think a model that would incorporate all tracks and all subtracks would substantially increase the complexity of the sequence analysis. I mean, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be interesting, but I felt that with this typology, it was the right level of detail, also considering my theoretical expectations, because it's difficult to elaborate very precise expectations about the mechanisms, knowing that there is little work on what are the factors that determine students' mobility in the Dutch system, especially within track mobility. I guess that teachers have a word to say, and then the role of parental characteristics, it's maybe a little bit less obvious. So I also decided to keep a broad picture because my theoretical expectations were not that precise, considering the overall lack of knowledge on the precise mechanisms that shape students' mobility patterns.
Thank you.
The opposition will be continued by Professor René de Groot, Professor of Comparative Law and Private International Law at Maastricht University.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, also my warm congratulations with your book. I read your book with great interest, and I want to stress the book is also very, very relevant for lawyers like me, and in particular for those lawyers who may take influence on the development of the future rules of access to the nationality of the Netherlands. I strongly advise you that you should send a copy to the Ministry of Justice. That's my most important remark. But I also have to raise questions. You argue that there should be a facilitated access to Dutch citizenship for children born in the Netherlands. And I have the impression that you are in favor of a conditional jus soli for those children. First question is, under which conditions precisely? Because you pointed to rules in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, but the conditions differ very much from country to country. That's one point. But there's also an alternative, because I could imagine that quite a lot of politicians say, is that not a bridge too far? And then we also have to study alternative. And the alternative would be lowering the age for the possibility to acquire Dutch citizenship by the exercise of an option right. You did not discuss that very much. At the moment, it is 18 years, except for those children born on Dutch territory who are stateless. Then it's only 3 years. That's quite a gap of 15 years. And a very important 15 years, and the whole education takes place at that moment. At which age, if we study this part, this possibility more precisely, at which age you would put the age limit? I can imagine that in the future, if you send a book to the ministry, somebody in the ministry phones you and says, yeah, which age should we take? Should it be 10 years? Should it also be 3 years or a bit in between? For which age you would opt and why precisely? That's my question. The second question.
Highly esteemed opponent, many thanks for your kind words and for your question about the policy implications of this research. So I think my policy recommendations, I think the right recommendation also depends on the mechanisms. And as I said in the thesis, it's not, I cannot really conclude what are the relevant mechanisms. And let me give more precision. So if the mechanisms mainly go through parents' improved position in the host society, it means that if we only give citizenship to their children, they will miss part of the positive spillover effect of naturalization. Mm-hmm. So whereas if the mechanisms mainly go through children's aspirations and well-being and orientation towards the Netherlands, then facilitating access to Dutch citizenship for children alone would be a sufficient and effective policy lever. So in that sense, my answer is conditioned by the fact that I'm not really able to weight which mechanisms which mechanism is the most prevalent. But having said that, I think one important result from the thesis is that the earlier the better. And so in that sense, the option procedure that is only available at age 18 seems too late. And it also seems not very accessible because although it's difficult to find precise figures about acquisition by second generation youth, it seems that it's not a very common mode of citizenship acquisition for the children of immigrants, which also suggests that the procedure is not very accessible. It's also it's still expensive, and it still requires children to voluntarily ask for Dutch citizenship. So I think it would be necessary to make the option procedure available earlier, but also maybe to simplify the procedure, because it seems now that children are not necessarily aware of this possibility. And about the age, it seems that citizenship matters, especially when it is acquired in early childhood. So in that sense,
You definitely can finish you. I'm not sure that we will hear a number, but you can finish your answer.
So I would argue that lowering the minimum age before the age of 10, based on my finding, would be the most suitable tool.
Thank you. Marie Labussière, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense, and I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return to this room.
Yes. This is the joy part, right? Enjoy it. You want some more?
I will do the ceremony. No. Well, that's fine.
Marie Labussière. The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense, and in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Maarten Vink is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom, and I invite your supervisor to now take the floor, and we all stand up.
Dear Marie, do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
Then, by the authority vested in us by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Marie Labussière, cum laude, the degree of doctor, and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present, in 1 second, you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Dr. Labussière, dear Marie, you have obtained the doctorate, the highest level of academic achievement, and you have done so with an outstanding dissertation, which the committee assembled here, your 2 supervisors, and 2 external experts who were consulted before the ceremony, so 10 highly esteemed evaluators in total, judged to be worthy of the distinction with honors, cum laude. Wow, this is excellent. And this means, of course, that there is no doubt whatsoever that, objectively, you really earned the PhD degree and the distinction with which it has been awarded. Congratulations. Congratulations also to Matteo, to your parents, and all the friends and family who have supported you over the years leading up to this very special moment. And of course, your 2 paronyms, Marloes and Imogen, who stood by you today. I am sure everyone is extremely proud of what you have achieved, Marie, and Mark and I certainly are. From today, you can call yourself Doctor. Sounds good, eh? Dr. Marie. And others, of course, maybe they are not aware of this, but others are, of course, also expected to address you with the appropriate courtesy. So just to be clear to everyone in the room, including Matteo, of course, your parents and the rest of your family and friends, from now on, it's over with Chère Marie or Cara Marie. It's Dr. Marie. And of course, the new family member that is on the way will have to call you Mama Dr. Marie. Okay, without kidding, your achievement, Marie, that we celebrate today is important, especially in academia, where holding a PhD title has become a standard requirement for university career. And with obtaining the doctorate, you are now qualified to be an independent academic, which means that we, the academic community, recognize your capacity to do independent scientific research, and that with university teaching qualification that you have also obtained during your PhD trajectory to teach and mentor students during their own academic trajectories. Before saying anything else, I would like to acknowledge especially the splendid collaboration with your 2nd supervisor, Professor Mark Levers. Mark, it has really been a true pleasure to supervise Marie. Actually, we didn't have to do so much supervision because, you know, you're so brilliant that you did everything by yourself, Marie. It was really an easy ride, and we were happy to be there along the ride with you. I think with the 3 of us, Mark and I, the 2 of us formed an excellent supervision team with complementary skills and insights. I want to recall here the late Jaap Bronkers, who was a mentor to both of us, to Mark in particular, but my collaboration with Jaap also inspired the choice of the topic of your dissertation, and you would have been proud of us standing here today together. Now, Marie, what else can we say in this laudatio, other than that Mark and I simply have been the luckiest supervisors in the world for you to spot the PhD vacancy when we announced it, and for you to apply for the position. We need a bit of luck in life. Back in early 2017, after the interview, which you aced by responding to all questions as calmly and assured as we did today, we did not have a single doubt about you being the right choice for this project. And with your interdisciplinary background in arts and social science, as well as in statistics, economics, and data science, we could not have mixed together a more suitable candidate for the project. Mark and I have got to know you over the years as an extremely diligent and meticulous researcher. For each supervision meeting, we would receive a document clearly outlining the practical, empirical, or theoretical issues to be discussed, the various options to consider, and a justification for the preferred road ahead. These documents themselves, actually this was commented also in the deliberation, were mini chapters in themselves. And for those of you who would like to see what I mean, just look at the dissertation and look at the 90-page appendix of the dissertation, which includes a wealth of additional material. Now, in your thesis, I won't say much about it. You investigate the extent to which citizenship status affects the educational outcomes. And this is really an important question. You've mentioned this, but I would emphasize this. In a country such as the Netherlands, you do not automatically become a citizen by being born on the territory, as you would in the US, for example. You, of course, wrote, when you started this, you wrote about this theoretically. It's something that you will now consider in your own life course trajectory, of course. And it's interesting to consider how important how this affects life course development of these children, especially in their educational careers. So you investigated this in 3 empirical chapters. 2 of them I would like to mention here already published in prestigious international journals, and 1 is currently under review. Fingers crossed. Your findings highlight that there are positive and substantive effects, and as you already mentioned, the most important lesson, I think it's important to keep in mind, the sooner the better, right? So citizenship matters, and the sooner the better. So your dissertation has an original theoretical and empirical focus, rigorous empirical approach, and has very clear policy implications. I mean, we can still debate about the precise age, but I think lawyers are also creative enough to make a good interpretation of your findings. But indeed, I agree that you might steer them a little bit. And I do hope that people in Den Haag will take note of your conclusions. So for these reasons, you have earned your PhD degree cum laude with honors. This is really something very special. In Maastricht and in the rest of the Netherlands, the cum laude degree is only awarded, so it's good to remind your family of this, on very special occasions. So Mark and I are very proud that today is one of those occasions. I will not read out the entire rules and regulations, but just for people to be aware of what it takes to get this cum laude added to the certificate. The rules require that the dissertation must be of exceptionally high quality. It must formulate clear theoretical and normative basic principles. The thesis places that analysis and thereby the problem in a wider theoretical context. The thesis demonstrates that the doctoral candidate is able to step outside the boundaries of her own academic field and go beyond its accepted assumptions. The thesis must make a substantial contribution to the academic debate, leading to new points of view or insights, and the thesis must be readable and accessible. And I think on all of those counts you did very well, but also would like to emphasize the readability and accessibility of your findings, which were excellent. So this is quite something. We all agreed that the dissertation merits this, so it must be true. Your degree truly deserves to be awarded with honors. Finally, a word of thanks to the European Research Council for funding your research, and also to Statistics Netherlands, and especially Hans Smeets, who was there in the audience, for greatly facilitating the data access throughout your project. You know, you developed your theoretical framework very originally, but indeed, next step is to test this, and without data, at least in your dissertation, you would not have been able to do what you did. So without the high quality data and the superb access facilities at CBS, the work that you presented today could not have been implemented. Well, that's it for now. Once again, congratulations from both Mark and myself. We have a present for you. We will give it over lunch, and then Mark will also add a few words. We are extremely proud of you and your work, and very happy that you have landed in such a great postdoc project at the University of Amsterdam. We wish you and Matteo all the best in your future, and especially in your next big project that is waiting to happen in the near future. Congratulations, and let's celebrate.
Dr. Labussière, also on behalf of the Board of Deans, I would like to warmly congratulate you with the honor acquired today. And that brings us to the end of this academic ceremony. Before I formally do so, I suggest that your company, as it is formally called, can leave the room immediately after this, and there will be opportunity to congratulate Marie over lunch. We will wait with you here to take a picture, also including Professor De Wolf, and then there will be another picture outside on the stairs. So it's a little bit of shuffling, but that is after I close this session.